Right, thank you very much. Um, well, first of all, greetings from Ballarat in Australia. Um, I'm 9 hours east of the of South Africa coast. Ballarat, just to give you a quick little picture because it gives you some context, based on gold mining, has many beautiful buildings and homes surrounded by beautiful grazing land. Um, the centre of the city is a lake. It's a population of about 107,000. And a particular feature is that all the busts of all the Australian Prime Ministers appear in our botanic gardens. So that's a lovely feature. And one day maybe you'll come and visit. Now, in terms of my background and Ballarat, just about every home is connected on the internet. All homes would have at least one digital device in their home, iPads, smart televisions, smartphones. In most cases, most youngsters have at least one of those. The population is a good mix of males and females. The majority of people fall within that 20 to 30 age group. It's a multicultural community, and of particular interest are the fact that it has outstanding secondary schools and a couple of outstanding universities. So I'm telling you this to give the perspective of how I'm looking at my paper and the introduction of education. I have studied both in the United States and in Australia. I'm really interested in developing tangible artefacts to help learning. I've received a national award for my learning and teaching. I've presented in a number of international conferences, and my particular interest, so I was very interested in Professor Ward's session, is how do we translate contemporary neuroscience findings to assist our learning and teaching? And I'm presenting a paper on that tomorrow. The aim of this presentation, though, is to introduce and examine the topic of micro-credentials, to identify some of the drivers of the rapid popularity and growth of these credentials, and to raise some concerns that I have about the lack of structure, systems, and policies and procedures for how the micro-credentials interface with university qualifications. And I hope I'll also encourage you to read my paper and continue discussions at your university. Now, what do you know about micro-credentials? I think it's always important in learning to try and gain, especially in an online environment, something of the prior knowledge and the experiences of the people that you are that are participating in your session, or the learners that you have in your class. So you might like to use the chat function, or just jot down or think some words that you think of when you hear the term micro-credentials. I mean, it's a very recent term, really, in terms of education. It's only one that I became aware of probably a couple of years ago. But so what do you think, micro-credentials? What words do you think of? What does it mean? What's the literature say? Professor Oliver, who's a colleague of mine, has done a lot of work on micro-credentials. And she's come up with an everyday definition, which is a micro-credential is a certification of assessed learning that is less than a formal qualification. Others have called it short courses offered outside formal educational systems, generally designed to address a specific workplace skill or need. You may have mentioned some of those when you were thinking about what micro-credential means to you. The OECD talks about alternative credentials, such as micro-credentials, digital badges that Professor Ward talked about, and industry-recognised certificates. They're credentials generally that are not recognised as stand-alone qualifications by relevant national educational authorities, Although in the very recent literature, you'll see that many of the authorities in their frameworks are starting to look at where micro-credentials might fit within the structures of higher education and vocational education training. So at the moment, micro-credentials seem to fill that gap between higher education programs and skills employers are seeking. So my paper investigates 4 key things. It investigates the rapid growth and appeal of micro-credentials. And certainly true that there's a lot of appeal about a micro-credential. It examines the impact of COVID-19. We were all locked up in our homes, educational facilities were closed, and we were really relying on online learning completely. Students had to suddenly change the way they were learning and interfacing with their teachers. Many teachers in Australia had to quickly learn how to present and interact with their students online. I identified the key stakeholders and their conflicting goals. And I do say conflicting because it's quite clear that the goals of, as a business and an employer in terms of their view of a micro-credential, they want work-ready employees, compared to perhaps a university, is very different in terms of their view of what education is about and their role. Parents are concerned about rising university fees. Students are concerned about being left with large student debt, or fee debt they have to pay off. So there's a lot of people that are finding micro-credentials quite attractive, and they're starting to question the value of a higher education qualification. And I want to offer some words of caution and recommendation, which is what the paper does. So I'll just touch on some of the recommendations that I think need addressing. And firstly, I think that universities need policies, they need procedures, they need systems so that they can make some wise assessments about how to manage and handle micro-credentials. As I see it, and this happens a lot, innovation outstrips the regulatory systems that need to sit behind it. So you've got demands for people wanting micro-credential credit and entry into universities, but in many places, those systems and policies don't exist. We need to be aware, if we're going to give credit and entry for micro-credentials, are we ensuring that those students have the necessary prerequisites and the knowledge and skills to be successful? We don't want them to enter into university degrees and then have a very negative experience. We also need to ensure that if we're going to give credit for some assessment that might be offered in a micro-credential, is that really comparable to what assessment was required in the university qualification where the credit is being given for, in terms of the content, in terms of the length of time that was spent on it. So the assessment area is very tricky. And also, and I think this is one that we often overlook, is that if micro-credentials are going to be offered for entry or for credit into university programs, particularly if those micro-credentials are owned by or managed by industry, then we need reciprocal arrangements, because what has happened, certainly here in Australia, is that someone with a degree in, say, physical education or fitness was not eligible to work in the fitness industry because they didn't have the supposed micro-credential that the fitness industry demanded. So we need reciprocal arrangements. So we need to be looking both at how the micro-credential qualification may in fact feed into a university program and make a nice transition, but also the ability for someone with a university degree to be able to be given credit to the industry certifications. I think there's a need for universities and governments and businesses to start to get together more and reimagine what a university in the 21st century needs to look like. And this is just even more important now with the impact of the pandemic and COVID-19. Universities need to consider how to transform the function and structure of the universities to meet the changing needs of society, whilst upholding the key mission, values and status of the university. And I guess that's my underlining thought here, that we need to be very careful that we don't allow the quality and the status and the role of the university to decline, to be watered down to satisfy the needs of employers and the needs of industry. Government leaders are responsible for funding universities, I believe, need to collaborate more with academic leaders and with scientists and with artists and people that look at future trends and business innovators to help reimagine a university design for the 21st century.
9 minutes up.
How much? 9, all right.
9 minutes. Okay, 3 more minutes.
If universities are going to collude with businesses and stack up my credentials like pancakes, which is what the Minister for Education in Australia suggested was the potential, I think we need to show some concern. And I'm also concerned about the potential loss of innovation, ingenuity and research devoted to solving the world's problems if universities become beholden to business and employers. We need further research, we need further discussion and policy development to ensure that micro-credentials add to, not subtract from or disadvantage, replace or devalue university qualifications. I shudder if in a few years we look at universities in terms of the building that I've shown on the overhead. Universities need to be better at demonstrating the direct value they bring to society, community and individuals. Otherwise, I'm fearful that micro-credentials may become universities' Trojan horse. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation and I hope it motivates you to read my paper. And I look forward to any questions or discussions you have.
Good morning, colleagues. I was actually quite excited listening to the last 2 presentations, a keynote and just now the one by Lorraine. And quite interesting that without a PowerPoint, she actually spoke and we were like all in awe of listening to her. I don't think anyone even realized that. So myself and my colleague, Dr. Swatch, we are lecturers and the Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment, and we're based at CPUT in Cape Town, South Africa. So we worked on a paper and that's directly in relation with COVID. So we thought, let's just come together and write a paper out of it. And that's what it's all about. So here we go. Now, this is something that I don't think it needs any kind of introduction because this is like a global challenge. But however, in South African higher education landscape, we also had to make certain changes and we had to like literally jump out of something that we were not doing on a full-on basis. And that's what was, both of us were like very much active in blended learning, but not complete remote learning or complete e-learning. So this actually challenge of this transition that had happened in 2020 this year, it led to an emergence of very new and innovative teaching methods for students. And I'm sure everybody on this panel will agree that it has like tremendously brought on board many of us on different platforms where we actually weren't or we never thought we will be. So as we all basically people in South African universities, CPUT as such has a historical demographics where we have diverse cohorts, and also there has been various challenges because of where it comes from. It's actually a merge of 2 universities, which is now called CPUT. So in order to address to those challenges, we as lecturers had to come up with something that was multimodal, it was flexible, and it was addressing to student challenges in terms of data accessibility, in terms of where they're remotely located. And that's where the concept of, we say it MIM apps, is mobile instant messaging, came into picture. And it actually proved as a very convenient tool for teaching and learning. And as we know, it's been very cost effective. Now, obviously, WhatsApp is something that we as lecturers and educators use as well. So that came out very cost effective, and so did Telegram. I'm going to speak more about it as we move on. There was actually an ease of access when it came to course content. And it was mutual, so it was like a good reciprocation of communication. It was more flexible and accommodating when it came to learning schedules. And it's almost like it's not like it wasn't there, the concept of learning. Everybody were already aware of e-learning, but the new concept of learning, actually, which is mobile learning, it just jumped into the picture of e-learning very quickly, because that was the quickest and easiest mode that the colleagues around the world, globally and nationally, could pitch in to, constantly be in touch with their students. So obviously, when we have any kind of platform or apps to use, there are its own advantages and disadvantages. So when it comes to relationship building, we felt as lecturers that it kind of gave us a platform where we could communicate one-on-one, because in the class, it's not always possible, even face-to-face. Many a times, the shy ones or the ignorant ones, for multiple reasons, just stay behind, and we don't reach out to them as much as the ones who are quite active in the class. So this created that bit of meaningful relationship, because then you can communicate one-on-one with your student, and the same vice versa, and also student with student, and they could actually assist each other. And they could also come back to the lecturer, where we could speak like on a one-on-one level and say, okay, what are your concerns, or what is it that you want? And sometimes they might need a little bit of extra attention, which was easy to provide. But along with that, the disadvantage of the message flooding and the eye strain because of the screen size of the device. And majorly, most of our students had cell phone access over a device as a laptop or a tablet. So the two important features that came up and the MIM or the MIM app was utility and usability. So which we have tried to portray in this figure here. So the usefulness, basically, if we break it down to utility and usability, it's obviously to do with pedagogy and social networking here. And the other one is technological affordances, where there is the technological aspect or technological support side to provide that social presence of students to give good cognitive outcomes, and obviously a good platform for teaching and learning. So coming back to the paper that we worked on, so the idea that we were provided at the institution was leave no student behind. So we have to make sure that even though we don't see them physically, virtually, we have to make sure that everybody is on board. So that actually what our paper highlighted, and there were certain issues in the process as well. But coming from two different departments, so myself and Dr. Swat, we from two different departments within the same faculty. So we tried to adopt these two platforms. So I was using WhatsApp and she was using Telegram. So this was more or less a multimodal approach, but it was very low tech. Because all of us are aware that data limitation was something that our students had to constantly come across, and we have to make sure that we make it as low tech as possible. So that's when the MIM apps actually came into our rescue, and it actually worked well for us. And we have adopted it so much so that we were already doing blended learning, and within our institution, both of us are recognized as e-learning champions. And we also belong to a community of practice WhatsApp group where similar e-learning platforms, e-learning champions are present in that WhatsApp platform, and we share common thoughts, and we share common belief system and common passion for the work that we do. I mean, we actually presented yesterday together at Heltasa conference relating to this community of practice. So that constant support was also there, and we could rely on assistance if at all we needed. So coming to the similarities and differences with WhatsApp and Telegram. So obviously WhatsApp being LMS supported. Now LMS is Learning Management System, which is Blackboard in our institution. The same with Telegram. I basically used WhatsApp with the first year students, the undergrads, because the advanced diploma students had good internet access. Whereas for her, she used Telegram mainly for her final year students and her BTech students. With me in WhatsApp, so I had dedicated time slots, timetable, and I had regular class times for interaction, and I had class hours for lectures via WhatsApp, and I had dedicated class hours for discussions and for case studies and so on and so forth. And she used it basically as a flipped classroom. So there weren't fixed hours. So she would provide the content earlier in the week, and the students can at any point of time work on the content that is being provided, and there will be exercises and tasks provided so that they can always work on it, and they don't constantly have to go back to the lecturer. And when they are busy with activities or exercises, if they need support from the lecturer, they can always message her back, and she then within 24 hours turnaround time, she responds to them. So the major difference between that is WhatsApp, students get to have the lecturer's contact number, so they can actually disturb you in your non-office hours, whereas in Telegram, you don't necessarily have to share your contact number, neither the student nor the lecturer. So that was quite cool about it. So the methodology that we adopted was where we applied a mixed method, and the survey basically started from May until August. We had a data collection method where we had a survey, which we did via Google Forms, and then we had a focus group interview. So the survey involved around 188 students, whereas the focus group was around 16 students. And the reason for that is we wanted a rich feedback, and also we couldn't ask most of the students to come join the focus group because of data issues, and I think then there was load shedding still in South Africa very prominently, so we only had a certain group of students. And another lecturer from a third department, we asked her to carry out the focus interview so that it comes out nice and unbiased. So obviously the WhatsApp and Telegram platforms that were used, so the questions were asked around them, and how comfortable they were using, what are the issues that came up, and what are the challenges that they faced. So the framework that we used from data analysis for our data analysis was basically from Gushago and Cupido's work around 7 design elements. And these are basically the design elements.
Sorry, 9 minutes up. You got 3 minutes left.
I'll wind up. So these are basically the 7 design elements around which our framework around the data analysis has worked, and this is what the student perception came out from each of these 7 design elements. So lecturer A, and these are the quantitative findings from her, and that's from lecturer B, and across each design principle. So the general perceptions around the idea of using it actually confirmed both the utility and usability factor that we just discussed earlier from the literature. They said it was quite user-friendly, it's less costly in terms of data, and it led to engagement with classmates, confirming utility, and it also was very simple to use, and which again confirmed the usability factor. However, some disadvantages were it was a bit uncomfortable because students were using their own personal device with their own personal number. Here, I would actually try to stress on the fact that there were there were a lot of them, and we couldn't in 12 minutes include that. There were one student who said that because she is a mother of a child and the baby was very young, and she felt that using Telegram and not have to travel to the campus and not have to come face physical and leave baby behind, she found it very useful. Whereas the other student who has studied all her life staying at residence or hostels, she felt it was very uncomfortable to go back and stay with her parents and study, because she was expected to do household chores and still at the same time study and do her homework and similar activities. So those are the ones that prominently came out. When it comes to learning, so basically from our qualitative findings, we found that there was a significant correlation between the proposed design elements in relation to our student requirements, but we highlighted some gaps as well. There was some inconsistent practices among lecturers. Some students felt that they were bombarded with information and content, and the quality of content or the usefulness of content that we were sharing, that's something that we need to further carry out a research on, because students didn't speak much about it, and that is something that we also not sure about. So these are the positive factors that came out: the simplicity, the multimodal platform where they felt self-motivated. Now they were individually in the comfort zone of their home, and they were studying on a one-on-one basis. So that's what something came out. The shy students, they actually participated because now they are not present physically, or they don't have to come in a video session. So they felt a bit strong about participating using the MIM apps. And one of the positive factors that came with Telegram is where I mentioned already the cell phone number concept, where they don't have to share the cell phone number. The negative factors were obviously message flooding, and one completely unexpected negative factor was the historical social environment. There was a student who mentioned that her parents told him that you're not the first one to go to the university, so don't try to be pretend to be that you're special or that you're unique, that you're going out and studying and during this lockdown. So they also have to go through that. So overall, we recommend that the 7 design elements, it actually adds tremendous value to our context. Although there was utility and usability that was confirmed, but still there are some gaps that we feel it needs some research, and also understanding how different MIM apps can have pedagogical as well as social impact on learning presents. And learning, however, is a meaningful direction for researchers and educators to explore further in future. There were some shortcomings where we basically didn't differentiate that this is a part-time student, that is a full-time student, and which students use the WhatsApp or which use Telegram. So we did it all together. So that is something that we have to work on next time when we're working on a similar paper. And in conclusion, we feel that the design elements, they have provided us with the guidance that we needed in order for this paper to form with a good outcome. And also the research, it highlighted the most primary and substantial challenges associated with teaching when it comes to the using of MIM apps. And it also provided, it was sort of an eye-opener for us to carry out further research on the apps that we used. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your time and patience.
Thank you. We got time for a couple of questions. If there are any questions on the mobile instant messaging applications.
I'm just gonna stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity and to be part of this interesting and enlightening conference. Just a quick and brief introduction of myself. So I'm Dr. Clifford Madondo. I'm at St. Joseph Theological Institute, where I'm the head of Department for Development Studies department. I'm also a part-time lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal here in Pietermaritzburg. My background is entrepreneurship. That's where my PhD is all about. Today I'm presenting to you the student experiences of an expected online learning environment due to COVID-19. So the case of St. Joseph Theological Institute here in South Africa. Sorry. So just the way COVID-19 happened in South Africa, just like everywhere else, it actually resulted into many higher institutes of higher education go into a sudden programs which they were not prepared. In other words, they were enforced to go into teaching approaches that they were not used. And certainly St. Joseph Theological Institute being a Catholic institute of higher education in South Africa, it is very much based on a didactic approach or didactic tradition of teaching. So with the forced lockdown, national lockdown, it got disrupted in that area of didactic tradition of teaching. So for me, there was this interest to reflect on the undergraduate student experience about this sudden move or sudden shift into remote and online teaching and learning. Because mostly our students are very much familiar with contact teaching. There is no online or remote teaching at all. So this was really a sudden move or a sudden shift. The problem that I've actually started reflecting on was that generally higher education institutions, when they face a crisis like the one that of COVID-19 pandemic, there is less consideration of this undergraduate experience group to try and consult or ask them and say which one, what will work for you and what to expect, what is it that they will have to expect. So my literature review really started looking at the background. Where is the online and teaching and remote teaching coming from? Where are the research on online teaching coming from? So I found that they come as far back as the early 1970s and grow into the late 90s, with all looking at various developments that has been taking place as far as the internet of learning is concerned. But for me, two angles were really very interesting in the literature that I consulted. It was firstly looking at the academic staff experiences, whereby most of the studies show that the academic staff experiences are an encounter of the changing culture of learning and emotional culture loss as well for many academics that are introduced or that get into the online teaching for the first time. It also is about, it's an encounter of planning process, new planning process, probably many of them that would have not even trained or skilled when they were in the training environment or preparing themselves for the environment. It is also an encounter of knowledge of pedagogy and an encounter of teacher agents and empowerment. So these are experiences that have been researched, that have been found to really sort of like most of the academic staff that face the online teaching for the first time kind of encounter. With students, the research is that have taken place really show influence of knowledge, context, and application in the online teaching environments. Mainly the experience, or this experience, is a combination of the physical and the psychological encounter, where mainly there is a lot of the students having to start using new technology or are forced to or find themselves using technology more than they would when they're in the contact environment. But what becomes very interesting is also the findings that really show high student dropouts when it comes to the online learning environments. So these have been very much happening and have been proven. Also, the lack of social and teacher presence. So there is a relationship between the high student dropouts and lack of social and teacher presence. So in actual fact, literature shows us that there is with online teaching and learning environment, they tend to create that physical and social distance between the teacher and the students, or between the lecturer, the academic and the students, which also very, very interesting in the literature. So in terms of the methodology that I used, it started with the institutional quantitative baseline survey, because the institute, right in the middle of the first semester, or just 3 weeks or so into the lockdown, the dean's office then decided to do a baseline survey in terms of trying to understand what is the student, where are the students at, how are the students coping with the online and remote environment. So I looked at that and took that and then applied the archival research design, because the data that was collected was a COVID-19 special collection data for the institute. So out of the 259 students that the institute has in total, all 120 students or questionnaires were returned as responses. Those I then use a descriptive analysis to kind of try to look at where the responses are in the data. And then I also had to apply content analysis, because some of the questionnaires also had where students had to respond, had to kind of like explain their answers to support what they would have filled in the survey. Then I then do a reflective interpretation of the entire data, the data sets.
Madondo, we got 3 minutes left.
Okay. So this is the response rate. Our response rate was 46.33%. Basically, the internet access and connectivity was very high. Students responded and said that they found that there was good internet connectivity. The multimedia platforms were also about 57% that we found. Then the experience in terms of the online teaching itself as well. So basically the yellow or the gold is disagreeing, and the blue is agreeing. Now, in terms of what we found is that the students the students' experiences were an encounter of 4 basic things. The dominance of laptops and smartphones kind of began to be very high. The bearable but ordinary internet connectivity on a daily basis, acceptable access to multimedia learning platforms. Also, the borderline, I think this was also very much important, because the borderline of what was perceived as friendly or what was unpleasant environment. So there was quite a very balanced in terms of those that felt that this was a very friendly environment, they could cope with it, and others saying that it was very unpleasant. They wanted so much to go back into contact. So without really I just want to look at to talk about the 2 bottom bullet points there. The multimedia learning platforms supported and enhanced SJTI's online education and performance. That's what the results are also showing us. Also, the online experience of students was an encounter of 2 things: the harmonizing continuous learning environment, which is whereby those that felt it was more of a pleasant environment, and the disruptive learning was more of those that felt it was very disturbing and they wanted to go back to contact. So a swift shifting into digital teaching and learning as a response to the COVID-19 crisis and lockdown regulations saved the academic program for the institute. but students had to accept the didactic approach merged into the blended remote and online teaching and learning. So in a way, students didn't really have much of a choice, but they had to accept and cope with it. So that actually, if you're reading into the sentiment of the data, you actually feel that they didn't really have much choice but to accept. In conclusion, students' experience highlights two things. They highlight the physical being the increased knowledge and use of laptops and smartphones. In other words, the multimedia use kind of like increased, and they really kind of express that they, and that's where the harmonizing comes in. The psychological is where students having to find themselves having no choice but to cope with understanding and accepting the change and shift into the intensity of using multimedia platform for learning, as well as all the other related activity, including assessments. So the future of the Institute really, and certainly the Catholic higher education sector, which is hardly researched, is likely to be in the hands of the next generation of academics and students who can embrace the use of innovative and digital teaching and learning technology. This is going to be the bedrock or in facilitating further shifts from didactic approach that are very common with Catholic higher education institutions to blend into online and remote teaching. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The title is correct, it's conceptual framework, but the new updated title incorporates experiential learning. So what we are trying to do, we are incorporating experiential learning through game simulation by adopting this block design principle. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Zoohan Gani. I'm representing Victoria University. I'm actually sitting in Sydney right now, not in Melbourne. We have a satellite campus that we run, Victoria University's degree. I teach Master of Enterprise Resource Planning Systems, which is mainly about business processes. Okay, so talking about business processes, sometimes using a content-based curriculum design can be a bit of a challenge to get through our cohort of students. Our cohort of students are mainly 100% international students, and they are first-year postgraduate students who are coming from a non-IT or information systems background, who are trying to learn about enterprise resource planning systems. And that's a big challenge, because for them to understand a process that is utilized within a system, it can be sometimes not an engaging experience for them. So most of our curriculum today, prior to this block design principle, has been a standard lecture and a tutorial. So we're trying to come up with very innovative learning experience by introducing this block design principle, which is mainly to try to do away with lectures and to have it more like an activity-based learning. So in other words, the block design principle is trying to achieve learning by doing. So in this case, how do I achieve this? By learning by doing. So we decided to introduce game simulation for students to learn about processes. So before I begin, I just want to let you know that in this unit, in our enterprise resource planning system, especially the unit that I'm focusing on, focuses on a couple of functional processes like production, procurement, sales, and distribution. So each of these functional units has its own individual processes. So by introducing this game simulation, we are hoping the students can come together as a team to do some planning, to develop strategies, to develop some ideas on how to win this game. The objective is for them to increase sales. At the end of the day, to increase the company valuation. So in order to do this, they have to come up with certain strategies. So that's what the little guy is writing on the screen. Planning, develop ideas and strategies. And of course, their goal is to let's say maximize profit for the company in the case scenario. Now, problem. So like I said, the problem always have been with the content curriculum is lack of student engagement. And the question a lot of teachers here, we always ask this question: how do you know that they really know? Yes, we do have summative assessments. And yes, we may have formative assessments that we develop in the classroom activities. But at the end of the day, how interactive are these students in order to ascertain the topic that they have learned to be ensuring that they can actually apply in the real life scenario? Because for one thing, from the information that we have gathered from the students in this study, which is a pilot study, by the way, this is not really an extensive study yet. It's just a pilot study because this game simulation has only been introduced for one semester. So we are hoping that we can move on to more extensive study in the future when the game simulation has been run for a couple of semesters. Now, so far to date, with students that we have actually collected this information from, have said their learning objective or their objective in enrolling in this unit so that they can actually go into the field and apply this knowledge. So if that's the case, then teachers have to challenge ourselves to embrace that objective of our students. Now, how are we going to embrace that objective? This is where the game simulation comes in. So we want to make sure that they know exactly what they are learning, that they can be applied in the real life. And the game simulation gives that real life case scenario, how they can apply that knowledge. So, like I said, prior to this block design principle and prior to this application of game simulation, the problem was trying to get the student engagement. Yes, students have the objective in their mind that they want to apply these skills and get a better job, be a profession in the field. But if they're sitting there and listening to my lectures and not being able to apply it to some extent, except for the summative assessments, then that can be a challenge to some extent. So we have decided to come up with this game simulation, and we have a methodology that we wanted to follow. So we have, in this game simulation, we have a certain round. This is what we call a distribution game, for example. So this focuses only on sales process. So in this sales process, we have like a round 1, round 2, and round 3. So what happens is, I think if I go back to my previous statement that I've just made, in this unit, we have sales process, procurement process, and then we do production as well. So we are trying to amalgamate all these 3 processes and trying to asking the students to apply that knowledge that they have learned in the class. So in round 1, we will just focus on sales process. So in this sales process, they have to undertake few transactions, such as they are trying to change price list based on the report that they get. So each student, they will get a report of how the market is working for each of the products. So in total, we will have 6 products, and each of these 6 products, they will have a market report, just to tell them which region is performing well in which product and so on. Based on this report, they will then decide how or when they want to change the prices according to the market demand. Then after that, they can also implement marketing expenses as well. So they can implement this marketing expenses planning. So what strategy they are going to take, how much are they going to spend per day on these marketing expenses for each of these products. Or maybe some students may not even want to do these marketing expenses. So that's like round 1. Then in round 2, you have, so round 1 is about changing prices. Then in round 2, you have, they will try to apply their procurement process concepts that they have learned, or skills
Gani,
that they have.
3 more minutes, Gani. 3 more minutes.
Already? Okay. Yeah. Wow. Right. So in round 2, they will apply their procurement process. So here they will then try to do their what we call they execute the MRP run, and by executing the MRP run, then they were able to do their purchase orders. And in round 3, they will have to do a forecasting, sales forecasting, material planning based on the future demands. So by doing all these 3 rounds, then in the end, you will get what we call a company evaluation. So this is pretty much the timeline that we have come up with for the students. So the timeline would be like, students will be in a group of 4, and that's how the round 1 will start. And excuse me, I haven't been well for a while, so I've lost my voice a couple of days ago as well, so excuse me. And then after round 1, they will stop for evaluation, group together and see how well they have strategized. Then after they have grouped together and discuss about how well they have strategized, then they will try to move on with round 2 and round 3 as well. End of round 1, usually will announce the winner just to give them the motivation, so that in round 2 and round 3, they can actually apply that motivation and help them to be more engaging in the game simulation and in learning the curriculum. And of course, at the end of round 1, the teacher can then ask questions that are more like a self-reflection question, like how did the marketing work, how did the pricing work, how did your strategy work, and so on. Just to get a gist of what sort of strategies that they have used, and also the other team members, they can learn something from each other as well. So based on the collection of our data, these are the few feedbacks and outcomes that we came about. Like students who, if in a normal situation, students always don't like working in group assignments. They will say, oh, this student hasn't put enough work, or I have put the majority of the work, and things like that. These are kind of comments that we get. But now in a game simulation, we were surprised that students were very much engaged in working in a team, in a game environment, because they are very competitive. They want to win this game. So we have students saying, I had no idea I was competing against all classes. If I had known, I would have worked harder. That is unheard of if you are giving them a summative assignment at the end of week 7 or week 8 of the semester. And students coming up to me now telling me, oh, if I had known, if I had to compete with the rest of the classes of the semester, I would have worked harder. And that's a positive thing. And also the weaker student, this took me by surprise. I've run this only for 1 semester, and took me by surprise that the weaker student, which was my Friday class, a group of students, and they come from a non-IT background. They have actually come from a medical background, actually, and they outperform other students from other classes as well. Both my Tuesday and Monday class. fast. And I was surprised because they really worked hard. They want to learn their content in order to, that was a push factor. It was pushing them to learn the content so they can apply to win this game. So all in all, we are happy about the progress that we made so far. So we hope to carry on with this progress and see how well it goes. So in the future, we are trying to do more extensive study into this experiential learning.